Hello and welcome back to the American Dream Portfolio. In the last video, we took a close look at what makes an asset appreciate or go up in value over time. The reasons are many and can sometimes be fickle, as they are often influenced by human emotion. But regardless of what the reasons may be, it is important to understand just how much appreciation you need to achieve the ultimate financial goal of the American dream. Financial independence, which is the ability to live off of your investments indefinitely without having to work. We can expect that every viewer of this channel may have a different target to reach before they achieve financial independence. Each person's financial needs and economic environment will vary. But let's try to make a reasoned estimate of what constitutes the average annual rate of return of a hard-working portfolio, one that will allow most people to achieve their version of the American dream. In other words, we are interested in the rate of performance rather than the number of dollars in the account. First, we must realize that, even though we are addressing a worldwide audience, all of the investments and analyses we will consider on this channel are based on US dollar-denominated assets. If you live in the United States, or in another country that uses the US dollar, such as Panama or Ecuador, or one that ties its currency to the US dollar, then you need not adjust our calculations to your local currency. But most countries use a currency that's independent of the dollar, like the United Kingdom uses the pound sterling, or the Eurozone uses a shared currency, the euro. People living in these countries must take account of how their currency fluctuates against the US dollar and how this impacts the results of their US dollar assets. Let's take a look at 4 different currencies and see how this has played out over the last 10 years. Our first comparison currency is the Brazilian real. Over the last 10 years, the US dollar has appreciated nearly 43% against the real. This means that, even if your US investments had remained flat over those 10 years, you would still be ahead in your local currency by 43%. Had you invested in the S&P 500 during that time, your US dollar total return of 294% would have improved to 420% in terms of the real, which is the currency you use to buy goods and services. One caveat here. These calculations are approximate because currencies fluctuate relative to each other every day. We are using the overall results for each 10-year period. Our next currency is the Egyptian pound. Here we find that the US dollar has appreciated 563% against the pound. As with Brazil, your US dollar investments could have gone nowhere for 10 years and you still would have been better off. In this case, 563% better off. This means that most of your Egyptian pound gains from an S&P 500 investment would have come from the strength of the dollar relative to the pound and not from the investment itself. The S&P 500's gain of 294% would have ballooned to a 1,655% gain in Egyptian currency. But there are a number of countries where the US dollar has been somewhat weak. For example, the dollar has lost about 3.4% to the euro over the last 10 years. For any viewer using the euro, your S&P 500 return of 294% would have been trimmed to 284% in terms of the euro. Another example is the Thailand baht, where the dollar's 9.66% depreciation meant that your 294% S&P 500 return would have declined to approximately 260%. What does all this mean? It means that, if you live where the US dollar is not used, then you are effectively investing in the dollar, just as you might invest in Amazon or McDonald's. If your local currency has a history of weakening relative to the US dollar, and if that trend can be expected to continue, then investing in US dollar assets could be especially rewarding for you. Your gains would come not only from asset appreciation and compounding, as we've been discussing, but from the added appreciation of the dollar with respect to your local currency. However, if the dollar has been weakening relative to your currency, then you must take that into account when you calculate your true or local currency rate of return. As we continue to perform calculations related to total return, we will, at least occasionally, factor in these 4 currency results to see what the currency-adjusted returns would be in each case. If we consider the worldwide scope of currencies, we find that most of them have been weak, or very weak. against the dollar, making US investments that much more compelling. Even in countries with very strong currencies, like Switzerland, a convincing case can be made for investing in US assets because of their tendency to appreciate at much greater rates than local assets. Okay, we had to tread through this minefield of what is called exchange rate risk to make sure you understand that, if you are paying for your lifestyle in a currency other than the US dollar, make sure to adjust your calculations of investment performance according to your local currency. And again, we will perform examples of these adjustments in this series, and from time to time. Now, exchange rate risk aside, there is another risk we have to allow for when determining the rate of return needed to achieve the American dream. That risk is called inflation, and most countries around the world experience it. We can define inflation as a general increase in prices over time. Put another way, inflation is an erosion of the purchasing power of your money over time. What used to cost $10, £10, or 10 bahts may now cost 15. To help us achieve wealth, our investment growth will have to outpace inflation, or we will fall behind or simply tread water with respect to what our money will buy. To take inflation into account, you must know what your country's long-term inflation rate is. In the United States, inflation has averaged around 3% per year. In the countries whose currencies we highlighted earlier, we get the following approximate results. Brazil, 3%. Egypt, 8 to 9%, which includes both high inflation and a more recent disinflationary trend. Eurozone, around 2%. Thailand, around 4%. Using results for the US, our portfolio must generate an average annual return of 3% just to maintain purchasing power. But we will also need real, or inflation-adjusted, growth so that our purchasing power increases over time. We will need this increase in purchasing power to help ensure that our portfolio will support us after we stop working. Assigning a number for real growth is rather subjective. We will periodically revisit this question as we analyse investments. For now, we will suggest that a real growth rate of 6% is sufficient for our purposes. With this real rate of growth, an investment left undisturbed for 12 years will double in purchasing power. We believe that such a result will get most people where they need to go, but we are open to your thoughts on this question. So, to answer the question of what rate of return we require to be on a path toward the American dream, our working number is 9% per year, 3% for inflation in the US, plus 6% for real growth. Of course, we will aim to do better than that if we can. Next up, we begin tackling the question of what investments, other than the stocks of creative destructors, should work hard enough to deserve a place in our American dream portfolio. See you then.